The candle flame danced against the cabin walls as another contraction tore through Clara Beaumont's body. Mercy Holloway pressed her weathered hands against the young woman's swollen belly, feeling the child shift beneath skin stretched thin as parchment. 1 o'clock in the morning, and already Mercy knew how this would end. "Please," Clara gasped, her fingers clawing at the rough-hewn bed frame. "Please tell me it's almost over." Mercy's hands moved with the practiced certainty of 15 years, checking the position, feeling for the heartbeat she already knew had stopped hours ago. The child lay still as stone beneath her palms, cold even in the humid Mississippi night. She had felt this absence before. 200 times before. "You're doing fine, sweetheart," Mercy murmured, her voice steady as river stones. "Just breathe through it. Let your body do what it knows." Clara's husband paced outside the cabin, his boots wearing paths in the red clay dirt. Through the thin walls, Mercy could hear him whispering prayers to a God who had stopped listening to her own pleas long ago. She pulled a clean cloth from her bag, arranging her instruments with mechanical precision while Clara writhed on sheets already soaked with sweat and tears. The next contraction brought blood. Too much blood, but Mercy had seen worse. She had caused worse. Her hands worked without trembling, guiding the child's shoulders, easing the small body into the world with gentle movements that belied the ice spreading through her chest. The baby slipped free in a rush of fluid and silence, its tiny form perfect and still. "My baby," Clara sobbed, reaching with desperate hands. "Let me hold my baby." Mercy turned away, cradling the child against her chest. A girl, with Clara's dark hair and her father's strong chin. She would have been beautiful. She would have lived, if not for the choice Mercy had made beside Blackwater 15 years ago, when her own daughter lay dying and something ancient had whispered offers from the river depths. "I'm sorry," Mercy said, and the words tasted like ash. "She didn't make it, honey. Sometimes the Lord calls them home before they take their first breath." Clara's scream split the night like an axe through heartwood. Outside, her husband's prayers turned to cursing, then to broken sobs that echoed through the cypress trees. Mercy held the small body close, feeling its weight against her arms, another coin for the debt she could never finish paying. She cleaned the child with river water, washing away the last traces of the life that might have been. Clara lay spent on the bed, her face turned to the wall, her body shaking with grief that would hollow her out for months to come. This was the part Mercy had learned to perform like a sacrament, the careful choreography of consolation, the gentle lies that made the horror bearable. She was perfect, Mercy whispered, wrapping the baby in soft white cloth. No pain, no suffering. Sometimes the merciful thing is to be called home early. But mercy was a word that had lost all meaning in her mouth. She thought of the small grave she would dig tomorrow, another river stone to mark another stolen life. The grove behind her cabin held 200 such stones now, arranged in neat rows like teeth in some massive jaw. She knew each stone, each small body that lay beneath Mississippi clay, each mother who had trusted her with their most precious burden. Clara reached out with trembling fingers, touching the wrapped bundle. "Can I see her face?" "It's better if you don't," Mercy said, knowing the child's eyes would be open and filled with accusation. They all opened their eyes at the moment of death, as if they knew what she had done, what she continued to do. "Remember her as she was inside you. Remember her alive." The young woman's sobs filled the cabin like flood water, and Mercy felt them wash over her without leaving a mark. She had learned not to drown in other people's grief, had built walls inside herself higher than levees. But sometimes, in the deep hours before dawn, those walls cracked, and she remembered what it felt like to weep for the dead. "Will you bury her proper?" Clara whispered. "Of course," Mercy lied. "In the church cemetery, with all the prayers and blessings. She'll rest easy." Another lie to add to the mountain she had built over 15 years. The child would rest in unhallowed ground, alongside all the others, their small bodies feeding something that grew stronger with each sacrifice. Mercy had stopped counting the exact number after the 100th death, but she felt their weight like stones in her pockets, dragging her deeper into waters where no light could reach. She helped Clara clean herself, washing away the blood with gentle efficiency while the young woman stared at nothing. The husband had gone quiet outside, his grief settling into the heavy silence that would follow him home. Tomorrow, they would pack their few belongings and leave Blackwater Bend, like so many others before them. The town was slowly emptying, one dead child at a time. "I don't understand," Clara whispered. "The baby was moving just yesterday. Kicking so hard I couldn't sleep." "These things happen," Mercy said, arranging clean sheets on the bed. "Babies' hearts are fragile things. Sometimes they just stop." But she understood perfectly. She understood the weight of the pact she had made, the price that grew heavier with each passing year. Her own daughter lived because these children died, existed in some space between breathing and stillness where death held no dominion. The trade had seemed simple once, one life for many. Now she knew that mathematics of the damned followed different rules entirely. Clara's husband finally entered the cabin, his eyes red with weeping. He looked at his wife, then at the small bundle in Mercy's arms, and something inside him crumpled like wet paper. "Thank you for trying," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Mercy nodded, accepting gratitude she didn't deserve with the same composure she had cultivated for 15 years. She gathered her instruments, her bottles and herbs, all the tools of a trade that had turned rotten at its core. The couple would grieve until dawn, then begin the long journey of learning to live with the hollow space their child had left behind. "I'll come by tomorrow to check on you," Mercy said, but she knew they would be gone by then. They always left. No one stayed in Blackwater Bend once they learned what kind of help she really offered. She stepped into the humid night, cradling the dead child against her chest. Spanish moss hung from the cypress trees like funeral shrouds, and somewhere in the distance, night birds called with voices that sounded almost human. The path to her own cabin wound through shadows thick as molasses, past the grove where 200 small graves waited for their newest addition. The river whispered her name as she walked, reminding her of promises made and prices paid. Her daughter was waiting somewhere in those black waters, 17 years old forever, beautiful and terrible and hungry for the souls that kept her tethered to existence. Tomorrow would bring another desperate mother, another chance to choose between salvation and damnation. Mercy Holloway had made her choice long ago. Now she could only follow it to its bitter end, one stolen breath at a time. Have you ever kept a secret so dark it changed who you were? Tell us in the comments. The shovel blade bit into red Mississippi clay as Mercy Holloway carved another small grave in the earth behind her cabin. 3 days had passed since Clara Beaumont left Blackwater Bend with empty arms and a hollowed-out heart, and now the wrapped bundle of her stillborn daughter waited on the kitchen table, growing colder by the hour. The grove stretched before Mercy in neat, terrible rows, 200 river stones marking 200 stolen lives. Spanish moss hung from the cypress branches like funeral shrouds, and the morning mist clung to the trees with the persistence of unquiet spirits. Each stone told a story of hope turned to ash, of mothers who had trusted her with their most precious burden only to leave with nothing but grief. "Another one for the collection, Mama." The voice drifted from the direction of the river, carried on humid air that tasted of decay and deep water. Mercy didn't look up from her digging, though her hands tightened on the wooden handle until her knuckles went white. 15 years, and she still wasn't used to the sound of her daughter's voice, hollow now, like wind through a broken flute, beautiful and terrible as singing from a drowning mouth. Her name was Mary Catherine, Mercy whispered to the hole she was digging. Clara wanted to call her Mary Catherine, after her grandmother. "Names don't matter to the dead, Mama. Only the weight of their souls." The shovel hit a cypress root, thick as a man's arm and twisted like arthritic fingers. Mercy worked the blade around it, her movements practiced from years of grave digging. The trees in the grove had grown strange over the decades, fed by innocent blood, their roots reaching toward each other in a network of hunger that spread deeper than any natural forest. "Do you remember the first one?" Sarah's voice asked, closer now, as if she were walking through the water toward shore. Mercy's hands stilled on the shovel. Of course she remembered. James Morrison, born perfect and healthy on a summer night in 1828, his small lungs filling with air and his heart beating strong as a church bell. Until her hands touched him. Until the life drained away like water through a broken cup, leaving nothing but empty flesh and his mother's screams echoing through the cabin. "I thought I'd done something wrong," Mercy said, resuming her digging. "Dropped him, maybe. Held him too tight. But you knew better when the second one died. And the third." The memories came flooding back, baby after baby born dead in her hands, mothers collapsing with grief while she maintained her mask of professional sorrow. Dr. Whitmore had questioned her methods after the 20th death, threatened to involve the territorial authorities. Other midwives whispered about curses and witchcraft, though none dared say it to her face. "I could have stopped practicing," Mercy said, throwing another spadeful of clay aside. "Could have refused to deliver babies, found some other way to make a living. But you didn't. Because you knew the truth. The truth." That was what Sarah called it now, though Mercy remembered it as the blackest night of her life. The night her own daughter lay dying of river fever, her small body burning with heat that seemed to come from the earth's core. The night Mercy had carried her to the water's edge and begged whatever lived in those black depths to save her child. Mercy set down the shovel and walked to the newest grave marker, a smooth stone she'd pulled from the riverbank that morning. As she placed it beside the small hole, her mind drifted back to that terrible night 15 years ago, when desperation had made her willing to bargain with forces older than the Mississippi itself. She had waded into the river carrying Sarah's fevered body, the black water closing around her waist like a living thing. The night had been moonless, thick with the kind of darkness that seemed to have weight and texture. And something had answered her desperate prayers, not God, but something that dwelt in the deep places where light never reached. "Please," she had whispered to the darkness. "She's all I have. I'll give you anything." The voice that answered had come from everywhere and nowhere, speaking through the sound of lapping water and night birds calling from the cypress trees. Ancient beyond measure, patient as stone, hungry as the grave itself. One life for many, it had whispered through Sarah's burning lips. "Your daughter lives, and all the children you touch will feed her existence. Choose quickly, woman. The fever takes her deeper with each breath." Mercy had said yes without hesitation, would have promised her soul and half the county to hear her child's voice again. She never imagined how the bargain would twist, how each delivery would become an execution, how her gift for bringing life into the world would transform into a tool of supernatural murder. "I saved you," Mercy said now, kneeling beside the grave as tears traced paths down her weathered cheeks. "I brought you back from the edge of death." "You brought back something that wears your daughter's face," Sarah replied, and now her voice carried the sound of deep water, of things moving beneath the surface. "But what lives in the river isn't the child you lost, Mama. It's something else entirely." The words hit like physical blows, because Mercy had suspected the same thing for years. The Sarah who visited her from the Blackwater bore little resemblance to the fever-bright child she had carried to the river that night. This Sarah was beautiful and terrible, innocent and ancient, a bridge between the world of the living and whatever hungry darkness dwelt beneath the Mississippi's surface. "You're still my daughter," Mercy whispered, but the words felt hollow as empty prayer. "Am I? Or am I just the bait it uses to keep you killing?" Mercy's breath caught in her throat. The question she had asked herself 1,000 times in the deepest hours before dawn, when guilt clawed at her chest like a living thing. Was her daughter truly alive in some sense, or merely a puppet dancing on strings of memory and desire? I see them, you know, Sarah continued, her voice now coming from directly behind Mercy. All the children you've buried. They're still here, Mama. Still waiting. Mercy turned slowly, knowing what she would see. Sarah stood at the edge of the grove, her pale skin luminous in the morning mist, her dark hair floating around her shoulders as if she were still underwater. She was 17 forever, beautiful as the day she died, but her eyes held depths that belonged to ocean trenches. Waiting for what? For you to stop. For you to choose death over damnation. For you to let me go. The plea in her daughter's voice nearly broke Mercy's heart all over again. She had killed 200 children to avoid that moment, had turned herself into a monster to keep one small piece of her world intact. The thought of losing Sarah again, of watching her disappear into whatever realm existed beyond death, was more than she could bear. I can't, Mercy whispered. I won't lose you again. Then you'll keep digging graves until the earth is full of them, Sarah said, beginning to fade like mist in sunlight. Until every mother in 3 counties learns to fear your name. Until the hunger takes not just the children, but everyone who comes near these waters. The grove fell silent except for the whisper of Spanish moss in the humid breeze. Mercy knelt alone among the graves of the innocents, the weight of choice pressing down on her shoulders like a gravestone. Around her, the river stones gleamed in the morning light, each one marking a life she had stolen to feed her daughter's unnatural existence. She picked up the Clara Beaumont baby from where she had laid her beside the grave, the small body wrapped in white cloth and still as winter. As she lowered the child into the red clay, Mercy whispered the same words she had spoken over every grave for 15 years. Forgive me. Forgive me for what I've done to you. But forgiveness was a luxury she had forfeited long ago, somewhere between the 50th and 100th death. She covered the tiny grave with handfuls of earth, each spadeful falling like a prayer in reverse, burying hope deeper than roots could reach. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the Spanish moss stirred without wind. Storm weather was coming to Blackwater Bend, the kind that turned the river wild and washed secrets from their hiding places. Mercy gathered her shovel and walked back toward the cabin, where another desperate mother would soon come knocking, trusting her with a life she had already decided to steal. The bargain continued, feeding on hope and birthing only grief. And somewhere in the black water, her daughter waited with eyes like deep trenches and a hunger that grew stronger with each innocent soul. The knock on Mercy's cabin door came at noon, sharp and insistent as a woodpecker's hammering. She looked up from her mortar and pestle, where she had been grinding herbs that would never heal the wound she carried, and felt her blood turn cold as river water. No one knocked on her door anymore except desperate mothers in labor, and they came only in the deep hours of night when pain drove away common sense. Mrs. Holloway. The voice was crisp, educated, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I'm Dr. Edmund Cray from Natchez. I'd like a word with you, if you please. Mercy's hands trembled as she set down the pestle. She had heard whispers in town about the new physician, a young man fresh from medical college who asked too many questions and kept careful records. The kind of man who might notice patterns that should stay buried, who might count the dead and wonder why they all shared the same midwife. She opened the door to find a tall, lean man in his 30s, his dark hair neatly combed and his clothes speaking of prosperity from the big city. His eyes were the pale blue of winter ice, and they seemed to catalogue every detail of her appearance with clinical precision. Dr. Cray, she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. What brings you all the way out to Blackwater Bend? The mortality rate, he said simply, removing his hat with practiced courtesy. I've been reviewing the birth records for this county, and I find them rather disturbing. May I come in? It wasn't really a question. Mercy stepped aside, watching as his pale eyes swept over her cabin's interior, the herbs hanging from the rafters, the clean instruments arranged on her table, the religious iconography that had lost all meaning 15 years ago. He moved like a man conducting an investigation, noting details that might later serve as evidence. "Tea," she offered, though her mouth felt dry as cotton. "Thank you, no." Dr. Cray settled into the chair beside her fireplace, pulling a leather journal from his coat pocket. "I'll come straight to the point, Mrs. Holloway. In the past 5 years alone, you've attended 47 births in this county. Not a single child survived." The words hit her like physical blows, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. "Sometimes the Lord calls them home early. This is hard country, Dr. Cray. The fever takes many." "Fever?" His eyebrows rose slightly. "According to the death certificates you filed, the causes range from weak hearts to failed lungs to simple failure to thrive. Not one mentions fever." Mercy's mind raced, searching for explanations that wouldn't sound like confessions. She had been careful with the paperwork, varying the causes of death to avoid suspicion, but apparently not careful enough. Dr. Cray's pale eyes seemed to see through every lie she had ever told. "I'm not a physician," she said finally. "I can only guess at what takes them." "Indeed. Which brings me to my next question." He leaned forward, his voice taking on the tone of a prosecutor addressing a jury. "Where did you train as a midwife, Mrs. Holloway? Who taught you your methods?" The cabin suddenly felt too small, the walls pressing in like the sides of a coffin. Mercy could hear the river whispering beyond the trees, calling to her with voices that sounded like drowning children. The memories she fought so hard to suppress came flooding back, that terrible night 15 years ago when she had carried Sarah's burning body into the Blackwater and begged the darkness to save her. "My mother taught me," she lied. And her mother before that. It's knowledge passed down through generations. Curious. I spoke with Mrs. Whitmore in town. She remembers your mother quite well. Says she was a seamstress, never delivered a baby in her life. The trap was closing around her like the coils of a serpent. Mercy stood abruptly, moving to the window where she could see the grove behind her cabin, the neat rows of river stones that marked 200 stolen lives. Dr. Cray was the kind of man who would dig until he found the truth, and the truth would destroy everything. "Perhaps my memory is faulty," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The years tend to blur together. As does guilt, I imagine." The word struck her like lightning, and she spun to face him. Dr. Cray was watching her with those pale eyes, his expression clinical but not unkind. He suspected something, but did he know? Could he possibly understand the true nature of the bargain she had made? "I beg your pardon. 47 dead children, Mrs. Holloway." Any competent midwife would have recognized her limitations after the first dozen deaths and referred patients elsewhere. Yet you continue to practice, continue to accept mothers who trust you with their most precious burden. Either you're criminally incompetent, or... He let the accusation hang in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Mercy felt her carefully constructed facade beginning to crack, 15 years of secrets pressing against the walls of her composure like flood water against a levee. "Or what, Dr. Cray? Or you're deliberately killing these children?" The accusation hung between them like a naked blade. Mercy felt the world tilt around her, memories rushing back with the force of a river breaking its banks. She was standing waist-deep in black water again, holding Sarah's fevered body while something ancient whispered offers from the depths. "One life for many," the voice had said, speaking through her daughter's burning lips. "Your child lives, and all the children you touch will feed her existence. Choose quickly, woman. The fever burns deeper with each breath." And she had chosen, God help her. Had bargained away her soul and the souls of countless innocents to keep one small piece of her world intact. The thing in the water had been patient, ancient, hungry as the grave itself. It had taken her desperate love and twisted it into something monstrous. That's a serious accusation, Mercy said, forcing her voice to remain level. I've dedicated my life to helping mothers bring their children safely into the world. Have you? Dr. Cray stood, moving to examine the herbs hanging from her rafters. These are all medicinal plants, Mrs. Holloway. Useful for treating fever, easing pain, stopping bleeding. Yet none of your patients seem to benefit from their application. He turned back to face her, and she saw knowledge gleaming in those pale eyes. Not complete understanding, he couldn't possibly comprehend the supernatural nature of her crime, but certainty that she was responsible for the deaths that followed in her wake. I think you know exactly what you're doing, he continued. I think you've been murdering babies for years, and I intend to prove it. The words struck her like physical blows, and suddenly she was back in the river again, feeling the cold water rise around her as she carried her dying daughter deeper into the darkness. The voice had come from everywhere and nowhere, speaking through the sound of lapping water and night birds calling from the cypress trees. The choice is yours, it had whispered. Save the one, damn the many. Your daughter's life sustained by innocent blood, her existence fed by souls too pure for this world. She had said yes without hesitation, would have promised anything to hear Sarah's voice again. But standing in her cabin now, facing Dr. Cray's accusations, she wondered if the thing in the water had ever intended to keep its bargain, or if it had simply used her love to create a monster. Get out, she whispered, her composure finally cracking like ice in spring. Get out of my house. I'll be back, Mrs. Holloway. With the sheriff, and with warrants to search these premises. If you've harmed those children, if you've been using your position to murder innocents, I will see you hang for it. He moved toward the door, then paused, his pale eyes fixed on something beyond the window. Mercy followed his gaze and felt her heart stop. There, at the edge of the grove, stood Sarah. 17 forever, beautiful and terrible, her pale skin luminous in the afternoon light. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance, and Sarah smiled with teeth sharp as broken glass. Who is that? Dr. Cray asked, his voice sharp with sudden interest. No one, Mercy said quickly. A neighbor's child. But when she looked again, Sarah was gone, vanished like mist in sunlight. Dr. Cray was staring at the empty grove with the expression of a man who had seen something that shouldn't exist, his scientific mind struggling to process an impossibility. Good day, Mrs. Holloway, he said finally, settling his hat on his head. I'll be seeing you again very soon. The door closed behind him with the finality of a coffin lid, leaving Mercy alone with her guilt and the terrible certainty that her world was about to collapse. Through the window, she could see Dr. Cray walking toward town, his stride purposeful as a man on a mission. He would return with authorities, with questions she couldn't answer, with accusations that would expose everything. But the thing in the river wouldn't allow that. It had fed too long on innocent blood to let its arrangement be threatened by one curious physician. Dr. Cray had seen Sarah, had glimpsed something that existed beyond the boundaries of medical science. That made him dangerous in ways he couldn't possibly understand. Mercy walked to the grove behind her cabin, where 200 river stones marked 200 stolen lives. The Spanish moss hung still as death in the humid air, and somewhere beneath the black water, her daughter waited with hunger that grew stronger with each passing day. The bargain was about to claim another soul, and this time, it would be the soul of a man who asked too many questions. Dr. Edmund Cray crouched behind the massive trunk of a cypress tree, watching Mercy Holloway disappear into her cabin as twilight painted the Mississippi sky the color of old blood. He had waited 3 hours in the humid darkness, his expensive clothes soaked with sweat and his medical bag clutched against his chest like a shield. The accusations he had made that afternoon burned in his throat like bile, but the certainty in his gut told him he was right. The woman was a killer, and tonight he would find the proof. The grove behind her cabin stretched into shadow, 200 river stones gleaming like teeth in the fading light. Dr. Cray had counted them from his hiding place, each one perfectly round and smooth, arranged in rows too neat for nature. Grave markers, he was certain of it. The evidence of 15 years of systematic murder, hidden beneath Spanish moss and Mississippi clay. He waited until the last lamp went out in Mercy's cabin before moving from his hiding place, his boots silent on the soft earth. The first grave he examined was fresh, the soil still dark with recent digging. A small mound, no bigger than what might hold a house cat, marked by a stone that felt cold despite the humid night. Dr. Cray pulled a folding knife from his medical bag and began to dig. The earth came away easily, as if it wanted to give up its secrets. 6 inches down, his knife struck something soft wrapped in white cloth. Dr. Cray's hands trembled as he cleared away the remaining dirt, exposing a bundle small enough to cradle in his arms. He had delivered babies in Natchez, had held newborns still slick with birth, but nothing had prepared him for what lay beneath the cloth. The infant was perfectly preserved, her skin pale as river pearls and unmarked by decay. Her tiny fingers were curled into delicate fists, her dark hair still soft against her skull. But it was her eyes that made Dr. Cray's breath catch in his throat, wide open and staring, filled with water black as the Mississippi at midnight. "Sweet Jesus," he whispered, his scientific mind reeling. No body could remain so perfectly intact after days in the ground. The child looked as if she had drowned moments ago, her lungs still filled with dark water that leaked from the corners of her mouth. Driven by horrified fascination, Dr. Cray moved to the next grave, then the next. Each small mound yielded the same impossible sight, babies preserved in death like insects trapped in amber, their eyes reflecting starlight through windows of black water. Some were older than others, judging by the settled earth above them, but all showed the same unnatural preservation. 47, he counted under his breath, moving through the grove like a man in a nightmare. 47 children, all drowned, all perfect. The medical impossibility of it staggered him. Bodies should decompose within days in Mississippi heat, should return to earth and bone and memory. These children existed in some state between life and death, suspended in preservation that defied every law of nature he understood. A twig snapped behind him, and Dr. Cray spun to find Mercy Holloway standing at the edge of the grove. Her gray hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her eyes held the wild light of an animal caught in a trap. In her hands, she carried the same shovel she used to dig their graves. "You shouldn't have come here," she said, her voice carrying across the humid air like wind through a graveyard. "Some secrets are buried for good reason." "My God, woman," Dr. Cray breathed, gesturing at the exhumed bodies around him. "What have you done? What kind of monster are you?" "The kind that makes impossible choices," Mercy replied, moving closer with slow, deliberate steps. "The kind that loves so deeply it destroys everything it touches." Dr. Cray clutched his medical bag like a weapon, though what defense could instruments of healing offer against 15 years of systematic infanticide? These children were drowned. Every one of them filled with river water. "You're not just a killer, you're a sadist." "I never harmed them," Mercy said, and the pain in her voice was genuine enough to give him pause. "I delivered them exactly as they were meant to be born. Death came from something else entirely." "What are you talking about?" "These babies didn't die naturally. They were murdered." Mercy stopped beside one of the open graves, looking down at the preserved infant within. Her expression held a mixture of grief and terrible resignation, as if she were viewing her own crimes for the first time. 15 years ago, my daughter Sarah lay dying of river fever," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nothing I tried could break it. Nothing the local doctor attempted made any difference. I was going to lose the only family I had left in the world." Dr. Cray kept his distance, but found himself listening despite his revulsion. There was something in Mercy's tone that spoke of truth, however twisted by madness it might be. "I carried her to the river," she continued. Desperate, grieving, willing to try anything. And something answered my prayers. Something old, Dr. Cray. Older than the Mississippi, older than the cypress trees. It offered me a choice. You're insane. Am I? Mercy's eyes fixed on his with laser intensity. Then explain those children, doctor. Explain how they remain perfectly preserved after years in the ground. Explain the water in their lungs that never dries, never grows stagnant. Dr. Cray opened his mouth to offer a rational explanation, then closed it again. His medical training provided no answers for what he had witnessed. The children were an impossibility, a violation of every natural law he understood. What choice, he asked, hating himself for the question. One life for many, Mercy said, kneeling beside the fresh grave. My daughter's existence sustained by innocent souls. Every child I delivered would feed her continued life, keep her suspended between breathing and drowning in whatever realm exists beneath Blackwater. The confession hit Dr. Cray like a physical blow. He had suspected deliberate murder, had imagined a midwife gone mad with grief or greed. But this was something far worse, supernatural murder, a pact with forces beyond human comprehension. You're telling me you made a deal with the devil? Not the devil, Mercy said, her voice taking on an odd, dreamy quality. Something older. Something that lived in the Mississippi before the first settlers arrived, before the Indians gave it names. A hunger that feeds on innocence, that grows stronger with each pure soul it devours. As if summoned by her words, the river began to whisper. Dr. Cray heard it as a low murmur at first, like wind through water weeds, but gradually it resolved into something that might have been voices. Children's voices, calling from beneath black water with words too distorted to understand. Do you hear them? Mercy asked, her eyes reflecting starlight like dark pools. They're still there, Dr. Cray. All of them. Suspended in the space between life and death, feeding something that should have died with the last ice age. Dr. Cray's rational mind rebelled against what he was hearing, but the evidence surrounded him in the form of 200 preserved corpses. Even if I believed such nonsense, why would you agree to such a thing? Why damn innocent children for one life? Because she was my daughter, Mercy said simply. Because I would have damned the world to keep her alive. And where is she now? This daughter you sacrificed so much to save. Mercy's smile was terrible in its sadness. Why don't you ask her yourself? The river's whisper grew louder, and Dr. Cray felt the hair on his arms rise as something moved in the black water beyond the trees. Ripples spread across the surface, too regular to be caused by current or wind. Something was rising from the depths, something that displaced water with the weight of unnatural existence. Sarah, Mercy called softly. We have a visitor. The thing that emerged from the Mississippi had once been human. Dr. Cray could see the ghost of a young girl in its features, 17 years old, with dark hair that floated like seaweed and skin pale as drowned flesh. But its eyes held depths that belonged to ocean trenches, and when it smiled, its teeth were sharp as broken glass. Hello, Doctor, Sarah said, her voice carrying the sound of lapping water. Mama's told me so much about you. Dr. Cray stumbled backward, his medical bag falling forgotten to the ground. The girl moved through water as if it were air, gliding toward shore with movements too fluid for human joints. River water dripped from her clothes, from her hair, from her mouth when she spoke. This is impossible, he whispered. So was bringing her back from the dead, Mercy said. Yet here she stands, preserved by innocent blood, sustained by the souls of children who never drew breath. Sarah stepped onto dry land, leaving puddles of black water with each footstep. The bargain has served us well, hasn't it, Mama? 15 years of life beyond death, 15 years of watching the river grow fat on young souls. You're a monster, Dr. Cray breathed. I'm a daughter who loves her mother enough to exist between worlds, Sarah replied. But the arrangement grows tiresome, Doctor. I tire of this half-life, this existence that feeds on murdered innocence. Mercy's face went white. Sarah, don't. He's seen too much, Mama. Knows too much. The hunger demands his silence. Dr. Cray turned to run, but found his feet rooted to the spot as if the earth itself held him captive. Sarah was moving closer, her impossible eyes fixed on his with predatory intensity. He could smell the river on her, could taste the decay that clung to her like perfume. Please, he whispered. Nothing personal, Doctor, Sarah said, reaching out with fingers that dripped black water. But some secrets are worth killing for. Would you sacrifice the lives of innocents to save someone you love? Leave your answer below. Dr. Cray's breath came in ragged gasps as Sarah's cold fingers brushed against his throat, and for a moment he felt the Mississippi's black water flooding his lungs. Then Mercy's voice cut through the night like a blade. Stop. The single word carried 15 years of maternal authority, and Sarah's hand fell away from the doctor's neck. He's seen enough. Let him live with the knowledge. Sarah turned to face her mother, and Dr. Cray saw something flicker in those impossible eyes, relief, perhaps, or gratitude. You're growing soft, Mama. The hunger doesn't like witnesses. The hunger can wait, Mercy said, though her voice trembled with the effort of defying whatever force had sustained her daughter's unnatural existence. Dr. Cray, you wanted proof. You wanted to understand what I've become. Look at her. Really look. Dr. Cray forced himself to study the thing that had once been Sarah Holloway, his scientific mind cataloging details that defied every law of nature he understood. Her skin was translucent as rice paper, revealing dark veins that pulsed with river water instead of blood. Moss grew in her hair like jewelry, and when she breathed, small fish darted between her lips. My God, he whispered. What have you done to her? I didn't do this, Mercy said, her voice breaking. The thing in the river did. I just gave it permission. Sarah laughed, and the sound was like water running over broken glass. Permission. Such a gentle word for damnation. She moved closer to Dr. Cray, her feet leaving puddles of black water on the ground. Tell me, Doctor, do you have children? No, he managed. Then you can't understand what drove her to this. The desperation of watching your child die, the willingness to trade anything, even your soul, for one more day of their laughter. Sarah's eyes fixed on Mercy with an expression of terrible love. She thought she was saving me. Instead, she trapped me in a nightmare that grows worse with each passing year. Dr. Cray watched the interplay between mother and daughter, seeing the bonds of affection twisted into something monstrous by supernatural intervention. Trapped how? You're alive, aren't you? Speaking, moving, thinking. Am I? Sarah asked, and her voice carried the weight of 15 years of existential torment. Or am I simply an echo of life, sustained by murdered innocence? Do you know what it's like, Doctor, to feel yourself growing younger with each soul you consume? To watch your memories fade as your body returns to childhood? The revelation hit Dr. Cray like a physical blow. He had assumed Sarah was preserved at the age of her death, but now he saw the truth written in her otherworldly features. She was smaller than she should be, her face holding the roundness of early adolescence rather than the angular beauty of 17 years. The entity feeds on more than just souls, Mercy explained, her voice hollow with grief. It feeds on time itself, on the years these children might have lived. Sarah grows younger with each sacrifice, losing pieces of herself with every stolen breath. I was 17 when I died, Sarah said, her child's voice carrying ancient sadness. Now I'm barely 14, and each year takes more. My memories of being alive grow dimmer, replaced by 15 years of watching children drown in my mother's hands. Dr. Cray felt his legs give way, and he sank to his knees among the open graves. The horror of it was beyond his ability to process, not just the murders, but the cosmic cruelty of forcing a child to witness her own slow dissolution while being sustained by innocent blood. Why, he asked, looking between mother and daughter. Why continue this? Why not break the pact and let her rest? Because I'm a coward, Mercy said simply. Because even knowing what she's become, I can't bear to lose her again. And because it's not that simple, Sarah added, kneeling beside Dr. Cray with movements too fluid for human joints. The entity won't just let me go, Doctor. It's grown strong on murdered souls, and it has plans beyond my mother's small bargain. As if summoned by her words, the river began to churn. The black water rose in impossible spirals, forming shapes that might have been tentacles or reaching arms. The air filled with the sound of children's voices, not Sarah's alone, but hundreds of them, all crying out from whatever realm existed beneath the Mississippi's surface. Tell him, a voice whispered through the darkness, speaking with the authority of deep places and ancient hunger. Tell the good doctor what comes next. Sarah's face contorted with fear and something that might have been relief. It's tired of small meals, Doctor. 200 children over 15 years, it was never enough. The entity wants to feed on a larger scale. What do you mean? Dr. Cray asked, though he dreaded the answer. Blackwater Bend, Mercy said, her voice barely audible above the river's whisper. Everyone in town. Men, women, children, all of them food for something that should have starved to death centuries ago. The implication hit Dr. Cray like ice water in his veins. He thought of the families in town, the children playing in dusty streets while their parents worked to carve lives from unforgiving land. All of them marked for consumption by an entity that had outgrown its appetite for infant souls. When? He asked. Soon, Sarah said, and her child's face held the wisdom of something far older than her apparent years. The next new moon. When the river runs highest and the darkness is complete. 5 days, Mercy added. 5 days until everyone we've ever known disappears beneath black water. Dr. Cray struggled to his feet, his mind racing through possibilities for escape or prevention. We have to warn them. Get everyone out of town before. And tell them what? Sarah interrupted. That their midwife made a deal with a river monster. That's something from before recorded history plans to drown them all. They'll think you're mad. The truth of it was inescapable. Dr. Cray could imagine trying to explain what he had witnessed, could see the faces of rational people confronted with supernatural impossibility. They would lock him away before they would evacuate an entire town based on his ravings. There has to be another way, he said desperately. Some way to stop this. Sarah's expression softened, and for a moment she looked like nothing more than a frightened child, which, Dr. Cray realized with fresh horror, was exactly what she was becoming. There is one way. But it requires my mother to do something she's avoided for 15 years. What? Let me die, Sarah said simply. Break the pact, sacrifice her own need to keep me close, and let me go to whatever comes after life. Mercy's sob was raw as an open wound. I can't. Sarah, I can't lose you again. You lost me 15 years ago, Mama. What exists now is just an echo, growing fainter with each passing day. Soon I'll be so young I won't remember being your daughter at all. Is that what you want? To watch me disappear one memory at a time? The choice hung between them like a blade suspended over their heads. Dr. Cray could see the war being fought in Mercy's face, maternal love battling against the knowledge of what her selfishness had cost. 15 years of murdered children, and now an entire town marked for death. If I break the pact, Mercy whispered, what happens to you? I don't know, Sarah admitted. Maybe I find peace. Maybe I just stop existing. But either would be better than this half-life sustained by innocent blood. The river's whisper grew louder, carrying voices that sounded like drowning children. The entity was listening, Dr. Cray realized, weighing the conversation against its own ancient hunger. It had waited centuries for a feast the size of Blackwater Bend, and it wouldn't give up such a prize easily. Choose quickly, Sarah said, her child's voice urgent with approaching dawn. The longer we wait, the stronger it grows. Soon even breaking the pact won't be enough to stop what's coming. Mercy looked at her daughter, her beautiful, terrible, impossible daughter, and Dr. Cray saw love and grief and 15 years of guilt warring in her expression. The fate of an entire town hung in the balance, waiting for a mother to choose between her child and everyone else's children. The Mississippi whispered its hunger into the night, and somewhere in its black depths, 200 murdered souls waited to see if their sacrifice had meant anything at all. Dawn approached Blackwater Bend like a funeral shroud, painting the eastern sky the color of old blood while Mercy Holloway stood at the river's edge with 15 years of murder weighing on her shoulders. Behind her, Dr. Cray waited in silence among the open graves, his pale eyes reflecting the horror of what he had witnessed. Before her, the Mississippi whispered with voices that belonged to the dead. 5 days, Sarah said, her child's voice carrying across the water with supernatural clarity. 5 days until it feeds on everyone you've ever known, Mama. Unless you choose differently. The entity's presence pressed against Mercy's consciousness like a tumor growing behind her eyes. She could feel its ancient hunger, its satisfaction at 15 years of innocent blood, its eagerness for the feast that awaited when the new moon rose over Blackwater Bend. 200 murdered children had been merely the appetizer for a creature that had waited centuries to devour an entire town. You can't seriously be considering this, Dr. Cray said, moving to stand beside her on the muddy bank. That thing has killed hundreds of babies. It's threatening to murder everyone in town. How can you hesitate? Because she's my daughter, Mercy whispered, her voice breaking like glass. Because I've spent 15 years keeping her alive, and the thought of losing her again is more than I can bear. Sarah's laughter drifted from the black water, hollow as wind through empty graves. Alive? Is this what you call living, Mama? Growing younger each year, losing memories like leaves in autumn, sustained by the blood of innocence? The truth of it cut deeper than any blade. Mercy watched her daughter move through the water with movements too fluid for human joints, saw the moss growing in her hair like jewelry, noticed how her face had grown rounder and more childlike with each passing sacrifice. The Sarah who had died of river fever at 17 was almost gone, replaced by something that wore her form but grew stranger with each stolen soul. The choice was always yours, the entity whispered through a dozen different voices, all the children Mercy had delivered stillborn, speaking in unison from whatever realm existed beneath the water's surface. Save the one, damn the many. Feed us innocent blood, and keep your precious daughter close. But she's not close, Dr. Cray said, his voice cutting through the supernatural chorus like a surgeon's scalpel. She's trapped between life and death, growing younger and more monstrous with each passing day. You're not saving her, Mrs. Holloway. You're torturing her. Mercy felt the weight of truth settling on her chest like a gravestone. She had told herself for 15 years that she was keeping Sarah alive, that the sacrifice of innocent children was justified by maternal love. But watching her daughter now, seeing the ancient sadness in those child's eyes, hearing the desperation in her voice, Mercy finally understood the true cost of her bargain. I see them, you know, Sarah said, floating closer to shore with hair that moved like seaweed in the current. All the children you've killed for me. They surround us constantly, Mama. Little ghosts demanding justice for their stolen lives. As if summoned by her words, the water began to glow with phosphorescent light. Shapes moved beneath the surface, small forms that might have been children, their pale faces turned upward like flowers seeking sun. They pressed against the river's surface from below, their mouths opening and closing as if trying to speak words that water wouldn't carry. "James Morrison," Sarah said, pointing to one of the glowing shapes. "Your first kill." He would have been a teacher, would have married Alice Fletcher and raised 6 children of his own. All of them never born because you chose me over him. Another shape rose closer to the surface, its tiny hands pressed against the water like glass. Mary Catherine Beaumont. She would have become a poet, would have written words that comforted thousands of grieving hearts. Silence before her first breath because you couldn't let me go. The river filled with them, 200 murdered children, all the lives Mercy had stolen to feed her daughter's unnatural existence. They surrounded Sarah like a school of luminous fish, their presence both accusation and plea for justice. "Do you see now?" Dr. Cray asked, his voice gentle despite the horror surrounding them. "You're not just torturing your daughter. You're torturing all of them. Keeping them trapped in whatever liminal space exists between life and death." "The new moon comes," the entity whispered through the voices of the dead children, and Mercy felt its hunger like a physical weight pressing down on the world. 5 days, and we feast on the entire town. Men, women, children, all will join these little souls in our dark kingdom." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Mercy thought of the families sleeping peacefully in Blackwater Bend, unaware that something ancient and hungry was counting down the hours until it could drag them all beneath Blackwater. Tom Baker and his pregnant wife. Old Mrs. Whitmore who had delivered half the town. The Fletcher children who played in dusty streets while their parents worked to carve lives from unforgiving land. "There has to be another way," Mercy said desperately. "Some compromise, some other bargain we can make." "There is no compromise with hunger this old," Sarah replied, her child's face twisted with 15 years of accumulated pain. "It's grown strong on innocent blood, and now it wants more than babies. It wants everything. Unless you break the pact," Dr. Cray said. "Release your daughter from this torment and deny the entity its greatest source of power." "And watch her die," Mercy whispered. "Watch her find peace," Sarah corrected, moving closer to shore until Mercy could see the tears streaming down her young face, tears that looked like river water in the pre-dawn light. "I'm tired, Mama. So tired of existing between worlds, of growing younger each year while watching you murder children to keep me here." The admission broke something fundamental inside Mercy's chest. For 15 years, she had told herself that Sarah wanted to live, that her sacrifice was justified by her daughter's continued existence. But looking at the ancient sadness in those child's eyes, she finally understood that she had been keeping Sarah alive for her own selfish needs, not her daughter's desires. "If I break the pact," Mercy asked, "what happens to you?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "Maybe I find whatever comes after life. Maybe I just stop existing entirely. But either would be better than this half-life sustained by murdered innocence." The entity's presence pressed harder against Mercy's consciousness, flooding her mind with images of what would happen if she defied it. She saw Blackwater Bend drowning beneath supernatural flood waters, saw every man, woman, and child dragged screaming into depths that had no bottom. The creature had fed on infant souls for 15 years, growing stronger with each sacrifice, and now it was ready to graduate to larger prey. "Choose quickly," the voices of the dead children whispered in unison. "Dawn comes, and with it the final countdown to our feast." Dr. Cray moved closer, his pale eyes reflecting the phosphorescent glow of the murdered children trapped beneath the water's surface. "Mrs. Holloway, you have to understand, if you maintain this pact, everyone dies. Your daughter remains trapped in eternal torment, and an entire town pays the price for your inability to let go. But if I break it, she dies," Mercy said, her voice hollow as wind through empty graves. "I'm already dead, Mama," Sarah said gently. "I died 15 years ago of river fever. What exists now is just an echo, growing fainter with each passing day. Soon I'll be so young I won't remember being your daughter at all. The truth of it settled on Mercy like a physical weight. She had spent 15 years fighting death, refusing to accept the natural order of things, and in doing so had created something far worse than grief. She had turned love into murder, maternal protection into supernatural terrorism. "What do I have to do?" she asked, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "Wade into the water," Sarah said, her child's voice carrying ancient wisdom. "Speak the words that will break the bargain, and accept whatever consequences follow." Mercy looked back at the grove behind her cabin, at the 200 river stones marking 200 stolen lives. Each grave represented a choice to prioritize her own needs over innocent life, a decision to feed her daughter's existence with murder. The weight of their combined accusation pressed down on her shoulders like the entire Mississippi River. "The words will come to you," Sarah continued. "The same way they came 15 years ago when you made the original bargain. But this time, you'll be choosing sacrifice over selfishness, love over possession." Dr. Cray reached out as if to stop her, then let his hand fall. "Are you certain about this? Once you step into that water, there's no going back." "There was no going back the moment I made the original deal," Mercy replied, moving toward the water's edge with slow, deliberate steps. "I've been running from death for 15 years, and all I've done is make it stronger." The Mississippi lapped at her feet like a hungry mouth, and Mercy felt the entity's ancient presence stirring in the depths below. It had waited centuries for a feast the size of Blackwater Bend, and it wouldn't give up such a prize without a fight. But as she waded deeper into the black water, feeling it close around her waist like a living thing, Mercy carried with her something the entity had never expected, a mother's love willing to sacrifice itself for the greater good. The final choice lay before her, weighted with 200 innocent souls and the fate of everyone she had ever known. Would you choose to save your child knowing it meant the death of hundreds of others, or would you find the strength to let them go? Tell us what you would do in the comments below. The black water rose to Mercy's chest as she waded deeper into the Mississippi, feeling the entity's ancient presence stirring in the depths below like some primordial leviathan awakening from centuries of slumber. The voices of 200 murdered children whispered around her, their phosphorescent forms pressing close as if seeking absolution for the sins committed in their names. "I know what I have to do," Mercy said, her voice carrying across the water with supernatural clarity. The words came to her the same way they had 15 years ago, rising from some deep place in her consciousness where desperate bargains were made and broken. "I release you, Sarah. I release all of them." "No," the entity roared through the combined voices of the dead children, its fury making the river churn with unnatural currents. "The bargain was made. The price was paid. You cannot simply walk away from 15 years of murder." But Mercy pressed deeper into the water, feeling it close around her shoulders like a burial shroud. The phosphorescent children surrounded her now, their small faces turned upward with expressions of hope and terrible hunger. They had been trapped so long between life and death, sustained by her selfish need to keep one small piece of her world intact. "I can, and I will," she said, the words tasting like absolution on her tongue. "I release my claim on Sarah's life. I break the pact that has stained 15 years with innocent blood. Let the dead rest, and let the living breathe free." Sarah's form began to shimmer in the water before her, becoming translucent as moonlight on glass. Her child's face held an expression of profound relief mixed with love so pure it made Mercy's heart break all over again. "Thank you, Mama," Sarah whispered, her voice already growing faint as whatever supernatural force had sustained her began to fade. "Thank you for finally letting me go." The entity's rage crashed over them like a tidal wave, and for a moment the Mississippi rose impossibly high, threatening to drown everything in its path. But the water held no real power now, it was fury without substance, hunger without means to feed. The breaking of the pact had severed its connection to the world above, leaving it isolated in whatever dark realm it called home. "You fool," it screamed through voices that belonged to no human throat. "Do you think breaking one bargain will stop what's coming? I have fed on innocent blood for 15 years. I have grown strong enough to take what I want without your permission." But even as it spoke, Mercy could feel the entity's power diminishing. The preserved children around her began to crumble, their unnatural flesh dissolving into ash that sparkled like stardust on the water's surface. Their voices joined in a chorus of gratitude and release, 200 souls finally free to find whatever peace awaited beyond the boundaries of life. "James Morrison," she whispered, watching as the first child she had murdered dissolved into light. "Mary Catherine Beaumont. Timothy Fletcher. Anna Whitmore." She spoke each name as their forms faded, a litany of the innocence she had sacrificed to feed her daughter's existence. The water began to clear as the last of the preserved children found their release, the phosphorescent glow fading until only natural moonlight danced on the Mississippi's surface. Sarah's form was almost completely transparent now, her features barely visible against the backdrop of flowing water. "Will you be all right?" Mercy asked, her voice breaking with 15 years of suppressed grief. "I'll be what I was always meant to be," Sarah replied, her words like wind through water reeds. "Free." Dr. Cray watched from the shore as Sarah's final form dissolved into moonlight, her essence scattering across the water like silver coins thrown to the dead. The entity's roar of frustration echoed from the depths, but it was the sound of a creature already defeated, its power broken by a mother's willingness to choose sacrifice over selfishness. Then Mercy felt it beginning, the price she had always known she would have to pay. The years she had borrowed through supernatural bargain came rushing back like a dam bursting, 15 years of stolen time demanding immediate payment. Her hands began to wrinkle and spot, her hair turning white as winter snow, her body aging decades in the span of heartbeats. "Mrs. Holloway," Dr. Cray called from the shore, his voice urgent with medical concern. "Come back. Let me help you." But Mercy knew there was no help for what was happening to her. She had cheated death for 15 years, had used innocent blood to purchase time she was never meant to have. Now the natural order was reasserting itself with compound interest, collecting every borrowed breath in a matter of minutes. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the water around her, though she wasn't sure if she was addressing the murdered children, her daughter, or her own damned soul. "I'm so sorry for what I did. For what I became." The aging accelerated, and Mercy felt her strength failing as her body paid the accumulated price of 15 years of unnatural preservation. But with the physical deterioration came something unexpected, a lightness in her chest, as if a weight she had carried so long she'd forgotten its presence was finally lifting. The grove behind her cabin began to change as well. Dr. Cray turned to see the Spanish moss that had hung like funeral shrouds falling away from the cypress branches, crumbling to dust as it touched the ground. The trees themselves seemed to straighten, their twisted forms returning to natural shapes as the supernatural corruption that had fed on innocent blood finally began to fade. "The children," Mercy gasped, her voice now thin as paper. "They're free. All of them. Finally free." The river stones that had marked 200 graves began to glow with soft light, and one by one they crumbled to dust that sparkled like stardust in the morning air. The earth beneath them shifted and settled, healing the wounds that had been carved into it by 15 years of systematic murder. Dr. Cray waded into the water, reaching for Mercy as she began to sink beneath the surface. But her aged hand slipped through his fingers like smoke, her body becoming insubstantial as the supernatural forces that had sustained her finally released their hold. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes meeting his one final time. Tell the mothers who come after, that their children will live. The water is clean now. The bargain is broken." With those words, Mercy Holloway disappeared beneath the Mississippi's surface, her form dissolving into the current like salt in wine. Dr. Cray searched the water desperately, but found no trace of the woman who had spent 15 years as the most prolific killer in 3 counties. The silence that followed was profound, not the oppressive quiet of supernatural menace, but the peaceful stillness of a world finally set right. The entity's presence was gone, banished to whatever dark realm had spawned it, its power broken by a mother's ultimate sacrifice. As dawn broke over Blackwater Bend, Dr. Cray stood alone on the riverbank, watching the sun paint the water gold instead of the ominous black it had been for 15 years. The grove behind Mercy's cabin was transformed, no longer a cemetery of innocent victims, but simply a stand of cypress trees where morning light filtered through leaves that rustled with natural wind. In the weeks that followed, Dr. Cray would witness the first successful birth in Blackwater Bend in over a decade. Margaret Foster's son drew his first breath with lusty cries that echoed across the water, his small lungs filling with air instead of the supernatural drowning that had claimed so many before him. The midwife who attended the birth, a young woman from Natchez who had come to replace Mercy, marveled at how easily the delivery proceeded, how naturally life seemed to flow in a place that had been cursed for so long. Other children followed. The Whitmore twins, born healthy and strong. The Baker girl, who would grow up to become a teacher like James Morrison might have been. The Fletcher boy, whose poetry would comfort grieving hearts the way Mary Catherine Beaumont's words were meant to do. Dr. Cray kept Mercy's secret, filing a report that attributed the unusual infant mortality rate to contaminated water that had since been purified by natural processes. The truth was too fantastic for official records, too steeped in supernatural horror for rational minds to accept. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the Mississippi ran especially peaceful, he would walk to the grove behind the abandoned cabin and remember the woman who had chosen damnation over loss, then chosen redemption over selfishness. The ground where 200 children had been buried was soft now, fertile with the promise of new life. Wildflowers grew there in the spring, their colors bright as hope against the dark earth. The Spanish moss no longer hung like funeral shrouds from the cypress branches. The river ran clear and clean, carrying no voices of the drowned, no phosphorescent glow of trapped souls. Children played on its banks without fear, their laughter echoing across water that had learned to sustain life instead of stealing it. Mercy Holloway was gone, her name spoken only in whispers by those old enough to remember the years when babies didn't cry at birth. But her final gift to Blackwater Bend endured, a promise kept at the ultimate price, a bargain broken so that others might live. The midwife who had buried every child she delivered had made her last delivery, and this time, what she brought into the world was not death, but the possibility of life reborn. If you stayed with this story to the end, comment, some bargains cost more than blood.